Hello, and welcome to the Intuitive Ouija. Thanks for clicking on my story. Before we begin, drop your city or country in the comments. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from. The rain that night, 10 years to the day since the world had shrunk to the size of a missing persons poster, was the kind that didn't fall so much as hang in the air, a cold, damp shroud that seeped through my coat and into the marrow of my grief. And I remember the specific weight of my key in the lock, the groan of the door swinging inward into the darkness of my apartment that still felt too big, too quiet, too empty without the echo of her laughter that had once seemed to vibrate in the very walls, a sound I could sometimes almost hear if I held my breath and strained my ears until they ached. A phantom limb of a noise that was both a comfort and a torture. And it was in that state, my hair plastered to my forehead, my hands shaking from the cold, or the 5th anniversary vigil we'd just held at the park where she'd last been seen. A pathetic cluster of umbrellas around a rain-smeared photograph tied to an oak tree. That I saw it, the Ouija board, sitting on my coffee table like a landmine left by my well-meaning but foolish friend Sarah, who had insisted a week before that we needed closure, or at least a distraction from the suffocating absence that was my sister Chloe, an absence that had long since hardened from a sharp, stabbing pain into a dense, heavy stone I carried in my chest every waking moment, a stone that had eroded my parents' marriage into two polite strangers sharing a house, that had turned my own life into a series of automated motions: work, eat, sleep, scour the internet for any flicker of news. And I almost threw it out, my fingers curling around the cheap cardboard edges, ready to consign it to the trash with all the other psychic charlatans and false hopes we'd wasted money on in the first frantic year. But something stopped me, a desperate, pathetic hunger for any sign, any whisper from the void. And so I called Sarah, my voice a hollow rasp, and told her to come back, to bring Mark, because I couldn't do this alone in the silence. And when they arrived, their faces etched with concern and a slight, uncomfortable skepticism, we sat on the floor in the dim glow of a single lamp, the rain still tapping its insistent fingers against the window pane, and we placed our fingertips on the plastic planchette, its heart-shaped window feeling absurd and childish under my touch. And I remember the smell of the wet wool of our sweaters and the faint electrical hum of the lamp, and the way my own heartbeat was a frantic drum in my ears. And I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "Is anyone there?" And for a long time, nothing, just the slight, involuntary tremble of our collective muscles making the thing shiver against the board. And Sarah gave me a look that was part pity, part embarrassment, and I felt a hot flush of shame for indulging in this, for still, after all this time, being so weak, so willing to grasp at anything, and I was about to pull my hands away, to apologize for wasting their time, when the planchette jerked. A sudden, spastic movement that made us all gasp, and it began to move, not in the slow, meandering circles of our unconscious making, but with a deliberate, almost angry force, sliding in a sharp, straight line to the word goodbye at the top of the board, and Mark, ever the rationalist, muttered, "Subconscious ideomotor effect, see? Our bodies just did that, but something in me, some raw, exposed nerve, refused to accept that, and I swallowed the lump in my throat and asked again, my voice firmer this time, 'I need to speak to Chloe. Is Chloe there?' And again nothing, a long, tense minute of silence broken only by the rain. And then it moved again, slower this time, purposeful, dragging our fingertips with it as it slid across the alphabet, pausing on N. Then O. And my heart sank, a lead weight in my chest. Of course it was no, of course she wasn't there, she was gone. And we had to accept that, we had to let her go. But then it kept moving, circling back, and it spelled it out, letter by agonizing letter, not, and then it stopped, hovering, and I could feel the tension in Sarah's fingers, the slight resistance in Mark's, and then it finished, the final, devastating word. Dead, and the air left my lungs in a rush, not dead, and a sound escaped me, a half-sob, half-gasp, and Mark was saying, "Whoa, okay, that's enough, this is messed up." But I gripped his hand, my nails digging into his skin, and I pleaded, "Where is she? Please, where is she?" And the planchette began to move again, and this time it was different, it was faster, more sure, and it went to the numbers, and it spelled out 1 to 0, 10, and then it went back to the letters, and it began to spell a word, a name, a place, and each letter felt like a brand seared into my soul. T, then U, then L, then S, then a Tulsa, and I repeated it, a choked whisper. Tulsa? She's in Tulsa? And the planchette, as if in final, emphatic confirmation, shot to yes. And then, with a force that felt like it came from outside of us, it slammed into goodbye, and was still, and we all snatched our hands away as if burned, staring at each other in the dim light, our faces pale masks of shock and confusion. And the first thing out of Mark's mouth was, "Your hands, you were pushing it, you have to have been." And Sarah, her eyes wide, said, Did you know someone in Tulsa? Did you ever talk about Tulsa?" But I hadn't, I was sure of it. The name was just a name, a place on a map I'd never once had reason to think about, a blank spot in my imagination, and the rest of the night was a blur of their rationalizations, their gentle, concerned attempts to explain it away. It was my grief, my desperate hope manifesting itself through my muscles, a cruel trick of the mind, a collective hallucination born of a rainy night and shared emotional exhaustion. And I nodded along. I agreed with them, because it was the only sane thing to do. And after they left, with promises to call in the morning and worried glances back at me, I sat alone in the silence, the Ouija board staring up at me from the floor. And I told myself, over and over, it was nothing, it was me. It was my own broken heart playing the worst kind of trick on itself. And the next morning, in the clear, gray light of day, I took the board and I put it in a garbage bag, and I tied the bag shut, and I carried it down to the dumpster, throwing it away with a final, decisive thud, trying to throw the memory away with it. But I couldn't, because those 5 letters, alive, and that one word, Tulsa, were now etched onto the back of my eyelids. They were a ghost in the machine of my mind, a secret, shameful splinter I could never dig out. And though I never spoke of it again to anyone, though I intellectually, logically, knew it was a meaningless coincidence, a psychological glitch, it became the secret engine of my life, the subatomic particle of hope that prevented me from ever fully accepting the official story, the presumed dead verdict that had closed the case file. And it was why, late at night, when the house was asleep, I would find myself on the computer, my fingers trembling as I typed "Missing Persons Tulsa, Oklahoma" into the search bar, scrolling through pages of faces that were not hers. It was why I joined online forums for families of the missing and always checked the regional subforums for that part of the country. It was why I saved every newspaper article, every local news segment mentioned from that city, building a secret digital shrine to a coincidence, a madness. And years bled into each other this way, the sharp pain of the first. Years sanded down into a constant low-grade hum of yearning, my life a flat line of routine punctuated by these secret, obsessive sessions fueled by that one inexplicable moment on a rainy night. A moment I had to believe was a message and not a mental breakdown, because the alternative, that it was nothing, was a void I could not face. And I dated, I worked, I celebrated holidays with my parents. We all carefully avoiding the gaping hole at the table where Chloe should have been, and I functioned, but I was a ghost in my own life, haunted by a whisper from a piece of cardboard. And then, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon, 11 years and 7 months after she vanished, my phone rang, and the number on the screen had an area code I didn't recognize, and I almost didn't answer, thinking it was another spam call, but some faint, almost imperceptible vibration in the air made me press the green button and lift the phone to my ear, and the voice on the other end was calm, professional, asking if I was my name, sister of Chloe, last name. And my knees gave way and I sank onto the edge of my bed, the world narrowing to the sound of that voice. And they said they were with the Tulsa Police Department, and that they had a woman in custody, a Jane Doe they'd picked up from a shelter, disoriented, malnourished, but she'd given them a name that matched a missing persons file, and they'd run her fingerprints, and they were a match, and I made them say it 3 times, my entire body trembling so violently I thought I would shake apart. And the words, "We believe we have found your sister, and she is alive," didn't sound like English. They sounded like bells ringing from another dimension. And the next 48 hours were a surreal, high-speed blur of frantic phone calls, booking a flight, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type my credit card number. The numbing roar of the jet engines, the endless, agonizingly slow drive. From the Tulsa airport to the county facility, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. And then I was there, in a sterile, beige-walled waiting room, and a social worker was speaking to me, her words coming to me as if through water. Trafficking, abduction, years in captivity, recent escape, trauma, be prepared. She may not recognize you. She may not be the person you remember. And I nodded, but I heard none of it, because all that existed was the door on the other side of the room. And then it opened, and she was there, held up by a nurse, smaller than I remembered, so much smaller. Her face a roadmap of hardships I could scarcely imagine, her eyes hollowed out and ancient, her hair thin and lank. But it was her, it was undeniably, miraculously her, the same curve of her cheekbone, the same slight dip in her chin. And she looked at me, and for a terrifying second there was nothing in her gaze. No recognition, just a flat, exhausted emptiness, and then her eyes. Focused, they sharpened, and a tiny, fractured sound escaped her lips. And it was my name, she said my name. And then we were both moving, collapsing into each other, my arms around her fragile frame, afraid I would break her, and I was sobbing, great, heaving sobs that felt like they were tearing me in two. And she was crying too, a quiet, ragged sound, and we sank to the floor together, holding onto each other as if we were the only two people left in the universe. And I kept saying her name, over and over, like a prayer, like a spell to make her real, to make this moment real. And the weight of a decade of grief and hope and despair just evaporated, leaving nothing but this pure, incandescent joy, this absolute, undeniable reality of her heart beating against mine. And for a long time, we just sat there on the linoleum floor, clinging to each other, and the world started to come back into focus. The social worker discreetly offering tissues, the nurse helping us to our feet, and into a quiet room with chairs, and we talked, or rather I talked, a torrent of words about mom and dad, about the house, about everything and nothing, and she listened, her hand in mine, her grip surprisingly strong, and she would nod, sometimes a faint ghost of a smile touching her lips, and eventually, through the haze of euphoria, the memory of that night, the secret that had sustained me for so long, bubbled up, and I laughed, a wet, tearful laugh, and I squeezed her hand and said, "You will never, ever believe how I knew. It's the craziest thing. It's a miracle. It was the Ouija board. Remember that stupid thing we played with as kids? I used one years ago on the anniversary, and it told me, it spelled it out. It said you were alive, and it said you were in Tulsa, of all places. I thought I was going insane, but it was right. It was actually right." And I looked at her, expecting to see my own bewildered joy reflected back at me. But her face was blank, utterly confused, and she shook her head slowly, a small, puzzled frown creasing her forehead. And she said, her voice soft and hoarse from disuse, "A Ouija board? I don't understand. I never touched one. Not since I was a kid. How could it?" And she trailed off, her eyes searching mine for an explanation I did not have, and the smile froze on my face, and the warm, joyful room suddenly felt very cold, and the image of the planchette moving under our fingers flashed in my mind with a terrifying, crystalline clarity, and I heard Mark's voice from a decade ago saying subconscious ideomotor effect, and Sarah asking, "Did you know someone in Tulsa?" And I looked at my sister, my real, living, breathing sister who had been through hell and back, who had been trapped in a nightmare while I was playing with a board game, and I realized with a cold, sinking certainty that reached down into the very core of my being that she had no idea what I was talking about, that the message had not come from her, that it could not have come from her, and the joy of that moment, the sheer unadulterated relief of having her back, did not vanish. It remained a solid, warm, precious thing in my hands, but it was now intertwined with another, colder reality, a deep, silent, existential chill that has never left me, the terrifying, unanswerable question of where that message truly came from, whether it was a miracle of my own love and intuition, a hope so powerful it tore a hole in reality itself to show me the way, or something else, something outside, a whisper from the dark that for one inexplicable moment chose to tell the truth. And I will never know, I will hold my sister's hand, and I will thank God or the universe or blind luck for her return. And I will simultaneously feel the icy finger of that mystery tracing its pattern on my soul, forever wondering what moved the planchette, what spelled out the truth on that rainy night. And the not knowing is the price I pay for the miracle, a chill in the warm sunlight of her presence that will be with me until the day I die. And so we rebuilt our lives around that chilling, miraculous core, the impossible truth of her return, a sun around which our family orbited in a dazed, grateful orbit, my parents aging 10 years in reverse in the first week she was home, the lines of grief on their faces softening into laugh lines as they hovered around her, afraid to let her out of their sight, cooking her favorite childhood meals that she could only pick at because her stomach had shrunk to the size of a fist after years of starvation. And we learned slowly, in fragments she could bear to share during therapy sessions that left her drained and silent for days, the horrifying outline of her lost decade, snatched from a street corner by a man with a kind smile who offered her a ride home from a party, the long, drugged drive in a windowless van, the locked room in a nondescript house in a city she didn't know, the endless parade of faces in the dark, the calculated erosion of her identity until she was nothing but a body for rent, a number in a ledger, and then, years later, a different kind of hell on the streets when her captors decided she was too old, too used up for their premium clients, and her eventual, desperate escape during a chaotic police raid on a different house, a different ring, her sprint into the night with nothing but the clothes on her back, surviving on sheer instinct and a memory of our faces that she said was the only thing that kept her from just lying down in an alley and letting the world take her. And every detail was a fresh knife wound, a new layer of horror to overlay the simple, clean pain of her absence we had lived with for so long. And through it all, through the tears and the nightmares and the slow, agonizing process of her learning to trust sunlight again, the question of the Ouija board sat between us, a ghost at the feast of our reunion, a mystery I could never bring myself to fully voice again after that first, chilling misconnection, because to ask her was to force her to confront an impossibility on top of her trauma, and to ask myself was to stare into an abyss that offered no answers, only a deeper, more profound unease. So I buried it. I locked it away in the same mental box where I kept the image of her suffering. But it was always there, humming just beneath the surface of my consciousness, a constant, low-frequency vibration of doubt and wonder that would flare up at the most mundane moments. Watching her stir sugar into her tea, the simple, human motion feeling like a miracle in itself. I would suddenly see the planchette sliding to tea, or hearing a song on the radio from the year she disappeared would transport me back to the feel of the cheap plastic under my fingertips, the determined, alien force that had guided us. And I began a new, secret obsession, a compulsion born not of hope, but of a desperate need for an explanation that would make the universe make sense again, spending hours late at night researching ideomotor phenomena, the psychology of grief, the countless documented cases of people's subconscious minds producing astonishingly accurate information through automatic writing or dowsing rods or talking boards. And I would almost convince myself, yes, that was it, my own mind, my sister's twin, my own deep intuition had somehow pieced together microscopic clues I hadn't even known I'd absorbed. Maybe a news snippet about trafficking routes I'd half heard years ago, maybe a forgotten mention of Tulsa in some long-lost context, my magnificent, desperate brain synthesizing it all into a coherent message, a divine lie my consciousness needed to hear to keep going. And this theory was comforting, it was scientific, it kept the world ordered and rational. A world where love could be that powerful, that clever, a world where the mystery was inside me, a testament to our bond. But then I would remember the sheer, statistical impossibility of it, the specificity of it, the name of a city I had no connection to, no knowledge of, a city that, upon my obsessive research after the fact, turned out to be a known hub, a waypoint on a circuit I had never heard of, and the comfort would evaporate, replaced by that old, familiar chill. Because if it wasn't me, then what was it? Was it some benevolent spirit, some discarnate intelligence that took pity on me that night? But why? And why that method, that cheap, mass-produced portal to the absurd. Why not a dream, a vision, a voice in my head? It felt too specific, too theatrical, too much like a cruel joke followed by a miraculous punchline. And the other, darker possibility, that it was something else, something that knew and took a kind of pleasure in the artistry of the reveal, in the precise mechanics of hope and terror, would surface, and I would have to go into her room, to stand in the doorway and watch her sleep, to see the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest, to anchor myself in the physical, undeniable truth of her presence to ward off the existential vertigo. And once, about a year after she came home, I made a mistake. I let the obsession slip out during a session with her therapist, who had asked me about my own coping mechanisms, and I told her, haltingly, about the board, about the message, about the utter lack of explanation, and the therapist, a kind woman with calm eyes, listened and then said, "Perhaps it doesn't matter where it came from. Perhaps what matters is that you listened, that you held on to that hope when everything else told you to let go. That hope brought her home. The origin of the message is irrelevant compared to the result." And it was a sane, healthy, therapeutic thing to say, and I nodded and agreed. But inside, I knew it wasn't irrelevant, not to me, because the result was a miracle, but the origin was a door left slightly ajar in reality. A door through which I had seen something I was never meant to see, something that defied all the rules, and knowing that such a door exists, that it can be opened even accidentally, changes everything forever. It makes the world both more magical and more terrifying. A place where absolute truth can be spelled out by an unseen hand using a child's toy. And now, 5 years after her return, as I sit in the backyard of the house we share, watching her tend to her garden with a fierce, quiet concentration, her hands, once broken, now nurturing life from the soil, the scars on her wrists pale in the afternoon sun, I am filled with a love so profound it aches, a joy that is a constant, warm presence in my life, but it is a joy that is now and forever twinned with that chill, the two sensations inextricably linked, the warmth of her smile and the cold mystery of that rainy night. And I have made a kind of peace with it, not an answer, but a truce. I accept that I will never know, that the how is a secret the universe will keep, and I focus on the what, the glorious, mundane, everyday what, of her laughter echoing in the halls, of her arguing with me over what to watch on TV, of her being alive. And I think that maybe the therapist was right in a way I couldn't see then, that the message, whether it was from my soul or from the void, was ultimately an act of love, a thread of light thrown across a decade of darkness for me to cling to. And I held on so tight, and it led me here to this moment, to this peace. And perhaps that is the only answer I will ever get. And perhaps, for now, it is enough, even as I still sometimes, in my darkest moments, look at my own hands and wonder. And the wondering is a ghost that has taken up permanent residence in the periphery of my vision, a faint shimmer in the air when I'm paying bills or folding laundry, a silent question mark hanging over the most ordinary of tasks. Because how can life ever be truly ordinary again when you have been the recipient of a miracle that carries the fingerprints of the inexplicable all over it? I find myself studying the world with a new, hypervigilant attention, searching for other cracks in the fabric of things, other moments where the hidden machinery of the universe might be glimpsed, watching for patterns in the flight of birds or the arrangement of fallen leaves, half expecting another message, another sign, though I have no idea what it would say or why it would come. This constant, low-grade anticipation, a new kind of haunting, a sequel to the first one. And I watch Chloe too, sometimes with a guilt I can barely admit to myself, searching her face for some flicker of recognition, some hidden knowledge she might have buried deep within her trauma, a subliminal memory of sending out a psychic SOS that her conscious mind has completely walled off. But there is nothing, only the slow, hard-won peace she is building for herself, a peace I would never dare disrupt again with my unanswerable questions. So I keep my vigil silently, my love for her a fierce, protective shield around the both of us, and my secret obsession a small, cold stone I carry in my pocket, a stone I take out and worry with my fingers when I am alone. And it is in these solitary moments that the memory of that night returns with the most terrifying clarity. not as a hazy recollection, but as a high-definition film playing behind my eyes. The feel of the cheap cardboard under my nails, the specific grain of the wood floor beneath my knees, the way the lamplight caught the dust motes, dancing in the air like agitated spirits, and the movement of the planchette, that smooth, unnervingly deliberate slide, a motion that felt nothing like the shaky, uncertain twitches of our own muscles. It had purpose, it had intent, and the sound it made, a soft, scraping whisper against the board, a sound that seems now to have been the universe itself shifting a gear, and I can still feel the resistance in Mark's fingers, the genuine shock in his gasp, the way Sarah's hand had gone limp with awe, and I know in my bones that it was not just me, that we were all passengers on that thing, that the force was external, a current that used us as its conductors, and this knowledge is the source of the deepest chill, because if it was external, then what does that imply about the nature of reality? That we are surrounded by forces that see us, that know our deepest pains, and that can on a whim intervene with the specificity of a street address? And why? Was it compassion? Or was it something else, something more akin to a scientist correcting an error in a complex experiment, a mere adjustment to the data set? These thoughts are a labyrinth with no exit, and I eventually have to pull myself out of them, to go and make a cup of tea, to focus on the solidity of the mug in my hands, the steam rising in a predictable, physical way, to ground myself in the tangible now, the now that contains her. And I am grateful, God, I am so endlessly grateful for the now. But the gratitude now exists alongside this new, permanent companion, this awe-filled terror, this certainty that the world is both more beautiful and more terrifyingly strange than I ever could have imagined, and that the line between a miracle and a haunting is perhaps the thinnest of veils. And on some level, I understand that this is the final, lasting gift of that night. Not just my sister returned, but my perception of reality permanently altered, expanded to include the impossible, and I will live the rest of my days in the breathtaking, unsettling space between the two. And this space is both a sanctuary and a prison, a vast, silent cathedral where every whisper echoes into infinity, and I am its only congregant, tasked with deciphering the liturgy of a single, inexplicable event, my life now divided into two distinct epochs. The time before the planchette moved, and the time after, a schism in my personal history as profound as Chloe's disappearance itself. And I find myself engaging in small, ridiculous rituals born of this new understanding, these silent acknowledgments of the unseen, like never leaving a book open face down, because what if something reads it, or always knocking on the doorframe of my bedroom before entering, not out of a belief in spirits, but out of a newfound respect for the potential of spaces to hold intention, for objects to be more than they seem. And the old Ouija board, the physical one I threw away, has taken on a mythical quality in my memory, and I sometimes have a mad impulse to go digging through that old landfill, to find its waterlogged remains, to see if it holds any clues, any residual energy, a notion I know is absurd, but feels no more absurd than the truth of what it did. And I look at other games now with a wary eye, a Monopoly board looking like a map of cosmic real estate, a deck of cards feeling like a potential tarot. The world has been re-enchanted against my will, and it is a lonely enchantment, because who could I possibly tell? My parents, who are just finally breathing easy for the first time in a decade. Chloe, who is building a fragile new life brick by careful brick. My friends, who would smile politely and suggest I talk to someone. This knowledge is my cross to bear alone, my secret weight, and it manifests in strange ways, in a newfound obsession with coincidence, with synchronicity. I note the time on the clock when it is 11:11. I see a license plate from Oklahoma, and my heart leaps into my throat. I hear the word alive in a song on the radio, and I have to sit down. The world is constantly whispering reminders to me, feeding my quiet mania, and I have become an archaeologist of my own past, sifting through every memory of that time, every conversation in the months leading up to that night, searching for a clue I might have missed, a fragment of a news report, a forgotten phrase in a book, anything that could have planted the seed of Tulsa in my subconscious. But there is nothing, only the blank wall of that name's utter irrelevance to my life before it was spelled out letter by terrifying letter. And this lack of evidence is, in its own way, the most compelling evidence of all for something beyond me. And it is this thought that keeps me up at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, every creak and groan a potential signal. And I watch Chloe sleep, her breathing even and deep, and I am filled with a love so immense it feels like grief. And I wonder if this is the point, if the message, regardless of its origin, was designed not just to lead me to her, but to break me open, to shatter my comfortable, rational worldview, so that I could be remade into someone capable of holding this much love and this much terror simultaneously, someone who could look at the miraculous and not need to explain it away, someone who could sit with the unknown and not panic. And in my better moments, I think I am learning to do just that, to hold the warmth of her hand in mine and feel the chill of the mystery at the very same time, to accept that both are true, both are real, that joy and dread can coexist not as enemies, but as partners in a deeper understanding, and perhaps this is the final devastating gift of the board, the reason it chose me on that rain-soaked night, not to give me answers, but to give me questions so profound that they would forever expand my capacity for wonder. And I am learning slowly to live inside the question, to make a home in the liminal space between the known and the unknown, to find a strange kind of comfort in the perpetual vibration of that unsolved mystery, which is now the background hum of my existence, the price I paid for. A miracle, and the reminder that the world is infinitely stranger and more beautiful than I will ever comprehend.